Today for math, we are going to be focusing on dividing a decimal by a decimal. This is lesson 7-6, and as always, you can find the standard that you're going to be assessed on right here. So please keep that in mind as we are moving forward and as you are doing your work. Dividing a decimal by a decimal is not as hard as it looks. I believe the key to this skill is to understand and know the powers of 10. When I talk about the powers of 10, I'm talking about a base number with an exponent. For example, 10 to the first power is simply just 10. But if I take 10 to the second power, that actually means 10 times 10, which equals 100. It is not 10 times 2. That's not what it's saying at all. 10 to the second power is actually saying 10 times 10. If I had 10 to the third, that would be 10 times 10 times 10. And that equals 1,000. So that's very important to keep in mind when we're doing this skill, understanding powers of 10. With that being said, let's get started. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my problem here, 8 4/10 divided by 0 3/100. And I'm going to put that as a division problem that I'm going to understand, in a format that I'm going to understand using the bracket, or as many of you know, as the little house. So I'm going to build my little house, and then I'm going to put in the numbers appropriately. The first number always goes on the inside, and the second number, which is the divisor, goes on the outside. Your dividend on the inside, 8 4/10, and then your divisor goes on the outside. Now the first thing I need to do is I need to change these numbers from a decimal to a whole number using powers of 10. The way to figure that out is I'm going to go to my divisor and I'm going to count the number of places it would take me to move my decimal point from the left to the right. And every time I do, I'm going to count it by a power of 10. So for example, I'm moving it, that's 10, that's 100. So the power of 10 that I'm going to use is going to be 10 to the second power, or 100. I'm going to multiply my divisor and my dividend both by 100. So I'm going to take, for my divisor, times 100. And that equals 3. I'm going to do the same thing to my dividend. I am going to write it, and I'm going to multiply that by 100. And that gives me 840. Let's move on to the next step. Okay, so what we have here now is my problem rewritten no longer as a decimal, but as a whole number. The one thing to keep in mind, and that's extremely important to do, is you do have to bring your decimal point up within your dividend. My decimal point was here between the 8 and the 4. I moved it 2 spots. Remember, from here to move it all the way to the right, I moved it 2 spots. I need to do the same thing here. It's going to be at the very end, okay? And I'm going to bring it directly up. I'm going to place a decimal right here. The reason why you want to do this, bring that decimal up, is because there are going to be times that you're going to divide, and it's not going to divide evenly. You're going to end up dividing into a decimal. So that's why bringing up that decimal point is extremely important. And now all we do is divide as normal. So let's go through it. 3 goes into 8. 3 goes into 8, I know, 2 times. So I'm going to write my 2 directly above my 8. And now I'm going to multiply. 2 times 3 is 6. I subtract. That's 2. And now I bring down my 4. And now I start working with 24. How many times does 3 go into 24? Well, I know that 3 goes into 24 8 times. So I'm going to place that 8 directly above the 4. And now I multiply. 8 times 3 is 24. 24 minus 24 is 0. Am I done? If you said no, you are correct, because I have to bring down my 0. And I know that 3 goes into 0 0 times. So 0 times 3 is 0. And my final answer is 280. Let's look at another example. This is a different type of problem because when I move my decimal point, I'm not going to be multiplying it by powers of 100. It's going to be a different power because I'm moving it not as many spaces. So let's work through it. Here I have my problem, 72 and 8 tenths divided by 10 and 4 tenths. Again, let's take this and let's change it into a problem, into a format that I understand using the bracket. So I'm building my bracket. And then remember, the first number is the dividend, always goes in the middle, or underneath the house, I'm sorry. Okay. And then my divisor is the second number, and it always goes on the outside. All right, now that I have that done, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to work with my divisor, moving my decimal point over. I want to move it to the right. So I'm going to move it. It moves one spot. So I am going to multiply 10.4 times 10, because again, I'm working with powers of 10. 10 to the first power is just 10. So 10 and 4 tenths times 10 equals 104. And then remember, I do the same thing with my 72 and 8 tenths. So 72 and 8 tenths times 10 equals 728. Now remember, we also have to bring the decimal point up. So I was going back to my divisor. Remember, I moved it one spot. So I come here, I move it one spot, and I bring it straight up. Okay? Okay, here is my problem that I was working on the previous screen. As you can see, I changed my numbers from decimals into whole numbers, and I brought my decimal point up. Now let's go ahead and divide normally. How many times can 104 go into 7? Well, it can't, because 7 is less than 104. That's not going to work. So I move to my next number. How many times can 104 go into 72? Well, guess what? It can't, because 72 is smaller than 104. So I move over to a third number. How many times can 104 go into 728? Well, I don't need to take out a bunch of paper to really figure it out. I know that 100 will go in, if I round these numbers, because it's why rounding and estimating is so important. If I round my divisor down to 100, and I rounded this down to 700, I know that 100 goes into 700 7 times equally. And I know that 7 times 4 equals 28. So I know that 104 times 7 is going to equal 728. So I'll put a 7 there. And now I multiply. 7 times 104 equals 728. And my answer is 7. My answer is 7. So, there you go. So you guys, let's do a little recap on dividing a decimal by a decimal. Step number 1, move your decimal point on the division, or I should say on the divisor, not on the division, but on the divisor to the right. Each time you move it, it's a power of 10. Remember, those go 10 and then 10 to the second power is 100, 10 to the third power is 1000, and so forth and so on. Step number 2, make sure you multiply your divisor and your dividend by the same power of 10. And then make sure you move your decimal point up, counting the spaces, understanding the power of 10, and then moving that decimal point on your dividend the same number of spaces and then bringing it straight up. And then finally, step 3 is to just divide as normal. So there you go. Your 3 steps to being successful with dividing a decimal by a decimal. I hope you write these steps down, and good luck on your work today.